What's up, family? It's your boy Danny, fresh in the flesh, making it all make sense on YouTube's most criminally underrated channel. If you think that you might be interested in nutritional theory, weightlifting, the skeptical philosophy of Piro, existentialism and existential psychology, and the principles of post-Keynesian economics, and how all those forces intersect in the life of a man who is not, never has been, and never will be in the tech industry and is not interested in making you feel guilty for not being productive enough, consider making me your YouTube homie. In today's video, all I'm going to do is read a pretty lengthy quotation from Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier, interspersed with a few of my own comments. This book is actually about nutrition. The issue on the table for discussion today is processed food, Big Brother's deadliest weapon. Just remember while you're watching, if you dig the vibe, like and subscribe. George Orwell was the pen name of English author Eric Blair, who died in the year 1950 at the ripe old age of 46. Since copyright protection typically lasts for about 70 years after the death of an author, the vast majority of Orwell's works are no longer protected by copyright. George Orwell was born in India, but his mom took him and his sisters back to England when he was 1 year old in the year 1904. Apart from one brief visit when he was 3 or 4 years old, Orwell did not see his father again until he was 9. Then he spent like 5 years in boarding school and was only home for the holidays. Orwell was a bit of a beta, but also a bit of an asshole and kind of a womanizer. That's because Orwell was a complex character. He described his family as lower upper middle class, which perfectly encapsulates what I'm getting at when I say that he was complex. That said, we're all complex characters, and we're all complex in just precisely this way. We tend to forget that in our day-to-day lives because it is much easier to deal with categories than it is to deal with persons, with archetypes than it is with individuals. Most of us are not quite as complex as Orwell, except for maybe this lady. But we're close. The stories, or the narratives that I like to call them, that we tell each other are as complex as the stories that we tell ourselves. The stories that get passed around in mass media are equally complex. That is why I absolutely despise it when people do that "are we living in 1984 or Brave New World" thing that they do. Both of these stories can be read as either dystopia or utopia depending on your perspective. Although I have read both Animal Farm and 1984, what I haven't read are any biographies of Orwell. If I were going to read a biography, this would be the one. Orwell the Man was a bit of a lanky, gangling, uncoordinated klutz who had some trouble getting along with the people that he admired so much in their natural setting, but that didn't stop him from trying. Orwell admired the working class, and he admired them from up close, but without romanticizing them. Orwell didn't condescend or remain hilariously out of touch the way that writers like Michael Pollan or other Bay Area literati do in today's day and age. This clear understanding of the working classes was reflected in both Orwell's books and his politics. In part 2 of The Road to Wigan Pier, which is the book that we'll be quoting from at length, Orwell said, "A real socialist is one who wishes, not merely conceives it as desirable, but actively wishes to see tyranny overthrown." I'm not sure what the difference is between conceiving as desirable and actively wishing is, but as my pappy used to say, actively wish in one hand, Daniel, and shit in the other, and tell me which fills up first. Doesn't nearly everyone actively wish to see tyranny overthrown? Even Joseph fucking de Maistre argued that the rationalist rejection of Catholic Christianity was directly responsible for both the French Revolution and the concomitant bloodshed that followed during the Reign of Terror. Yes, this Joseph de Maistre. Now, he would have called the French Revolution tyranny, whereas the Frenchmen agitating for the revolution would have called the Catholic monarchy tyranny. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, the same way that one man's tyranny is another man's ordered liberty. De Maistre would have argued that the thrown-in-altar conservatism that he advocated for would have been protection against the tyranny of abstract reason. Why did I go off on this tangent? I don't know. Back to Orwell. Orwell stated in Why I Write, "Every line of serious work that I have written since 1936 has been written directly or indirectly against totalitarianism and for democratic socialism as I understand it. Orwell's conception of socialism was of a planned economy alongside democracy. I think we can forgive him for misunderstanding the planned economy thing. Nobody knew any better back then. Orwell also wrote in the Road to Wigan Pier, "I worked out an anarchistic theory that all government is evil, that the punishment always does more harm than the crime, and the people can be trusted to behave decently if you will only let them alone." He continued and argued that it is always necessary to protect peaceful people from violence. In any state of society where crime can be profitable, you have got to have a harsh criminal law and administer it ruthlessly. If all government is evil, how exactly are we going to find the good men and women to both legislate and ruthlessly administer this harsh criminal law he's talking about? This is the sort of contradiction that cannot be worked out. This is the sort of contradiction that Greek tragedians worked with in their plays. This, in fact, is the basic contradiction at the root of all politics. I think everybody agrees that there is both a baseline communism and a baseline libertarianism, little c and little l, that are both absolutely necessary for a smooth functioning society that both enables and promotes human flourishing. We should all keep that in mind when we're arguing with each other. Literally everybody wants what's best for everybody. We're ready to dive in now. As we read, however, note well that the more things change, the more things stay the same. This was written almost 100 years ago during the Great Depression, or just after the Great Depression in England, so 1936 or so. And note how prescient and how, relatable it is to today. But the English palate, especially the working class palate, now rejects good food almost automatically. And today, are Doritos really hyper palatable? Do Doritos really taste better than a bacon-wrapped filet with a loaded baked potato? The number of people who prefer tin peas and tin fish to real peas and real fish must be increasing every year, and plenty of people who could afford real milk in their tea would much sooner have tin milk, even that dreadful tin milk which is made of sugar and corn flour and has "unfit for babies" on the tin in huge letters. In some districts, efforts are now being made to teach the unemployed more about food values and more about the intelligent spending of money. When you hear of a thing like this, you feel yourself torn both ways. I have heard a communist speaker on the platform grow very angry about it. In London, he said, parties of society dames now have the cheek to walk into East End houses and give shopping lessons to the wives of the unemployed. He gave this as an instance of the mentality of the English governing class. First, you condemn a family to live on 30 shillings a week, and then you have the damned impertinence to tell them how they are to spend their money. You tell them to eat less and move more on $2,000 a week. All the same, it is a pity that merely for the lack of a proper tradition, people should pour muck like tin milk down their throats and not even know that it is inferior to the product of the cow. Trade since the war has had to adjust itself to meet the demands of underpaid, underfed people, with the result that a luxury is nowadays almost always cheaper than a necessity. For the price of 1 square meal, you can get 2 pounds of cheap sweets. For the price of 1 square meal on the perimeter of the grocery store, you can get 2 pounds of ultra-processed garbage from the aisles. And above all, there is gambling, the cheapest of all luxuries. Even people on the verge of starvation can buy a few days' hope, something to live for, as they call it, by having a penny on a sweepstake. Organized gambling has now almost risen to the status of a major industry. And then there is the queer spectacle of modern electrical science showering miracles upon people with empty bellies. Or, in our case, distended bellies and swollen livers. You may shiver all night for lack of bedclothes, but in the morning you can go to the public library and read the news that has been telegraphed for your benefit from San Francisco and Singapore. I know your neighborhood is run down, you don't have a pension, you have no money or real time for genuine leisure, and you can't afford an education, but hey, you got Netflix and Hulu. 20 million people are underfed, but literally everyone in England has access to a radio. About 40 million people in America have diabetes, but that's okay because they all got fucking smartphones. Whole sections of the working class who have been plundered of all they really need are being compensated in part by cheap luxuries which mitigate the surface of life. Do you consider all this desirable? I don't. But it may be that the psychological adjustment which the working class are visibly making is the best they can make in the circumstances. Maybe diabetes, obesity, smoking, alcoholism, divorce, meaningless sex, and meaningless and or compensatory religion and isolation are the best that people can do and adjust in our circumstances as well. They have neither turned revolutionary nor lost their self-respect. Merely they have kept their tempers and settled down to make the best of things on a fish and chip standard. What do I think? Is it a conspiracy by our rulers? I think exactly what Orwell thinks. Listen up. The post-war development of cheap luxuries has been a very fortunate thing for our rulers. It is quite likely that fish and chips, art silk stockings, tin salmon, cut-price chocolate, the movies, the radio, strong tea, and the football pools have between them averted revolution. Therefore, we are sometimes told that the whole thing is an astute maneuver by the governing class, a sort of bread and circuses business to hold the unemployed down. What I have seen of our governing class does not convince me that they have that much intelligence. The thing has happened, but by an unconscious process. The quite natural interaction between the manufacturer's need for a market and the need of a half-starved people for a cheap palliative. Think about it! Markets don't make fiercely independent men and women. Markets don't make unique, beautiful, strong, capable, loving persons that are ready to enter into respectful and mature communion with other persons. Markets make masses. Masses make classes, and classes devolve into factions. It is in their very nature to do so. It's a diffuse social phenomenon without any one particular class or individual to blame. Of course, one ought not to imagine that the prevailing bad physique is due solely to unemployment, for it is probable that the physical average has been declining all over England for a long time past, and not merely among the unemployed in the industrial areas. Puny limbs, sickly faces, under the weeping London sky. Hardly a well-built man or a decent-looking woman, and not a fresh complexion anywhere. 70.2% of American adults are overweight or obese. 67% of Australian adults. 63% of adults in the United Kingdom. Where are the monstrous men with chests like barrels and mustaches like the wings of eagles who strode across my childhood's gaze 20 or 30 years ago? Buried, I suppose, in the Flanders mud. In their place, there are these pale-faced boys who have been picked for their height and consequently look like hot poles in overcoats. The truth being that in modern England, a man over 6 feet high is usually skin and bone and not much else. If the English physique has declined, this is in no doubt partly due to the fact that the Great War carefully selected the million best men in England and slaughtered them largely before they had time to breed. And now, he really puts his finger on the pulse. But the process must have begun earlier than that. And it must be due ultimately to the unhealthy ways of living. That is, industrialism. I don't mean the habit of living in towns. Probably the town is healthier than the country in many ways. But the modern industrial technique which provides you with cheap substitutes for everything. Ways of living is a totalizing, comprehensive concept that we won't discuss in detail right now, but health is obvious. Health radiates. Health is not a subjective trait that's in the eye of the beholder. Health is an inherent trait of the beheld. So the decline, the physical degeneration that Orwell is speaking of here, must be due to unhealthy ways of living. Obviously unhealthy ways of living. Now don't come at me with your degenerate urbanite nonsense either. I've lived in the country, okay, and I know how it is, and Orwell has it exactly right here. Unfortunately, he has it even more right here. We may find, in the long run, that tin food is a deadlier weapon than the machine gun. Orwell knew real violence. He spent time in Spain during the Civil War. Deadlier is being used metaphorically here, but that does not mean that it's being used incorrectly. Back when Ancel Keys first got going and started doing a lot of his research, and there was a lot of the original sociology research on mice colonies, scientists used to wax poetic about the implications of their research. Ancel Keys said, while musing about the results of the Minnesota starvation study, that starved people cannot be taught democracy. To talk about the will of the people when you aren't feeding them is perfect hogwash. Do you really think we're feeding everybody properly? They wouldn't be eating if they weren't hungry. They wouldn't be obese if they weren't starving. Can a starving people be anything other than stupefied and miserable? Can a starving people be taught democracy? Can a starving people be happy? And is processed food deadlier than the machine gun? Let me know in the comments down below. It's up to us to fix this, family, because nobody is coming to save us. It's not going to happen from top down, okay? Hey, thanks for sticking around. You must have enjoyed the video. If you did, remember, if you dig the vibe, like and subscribe. Do your boy Danny a favor, smash that like button right there, please. It's your boy Danny reminding you once again that you are beautiful, capable, and strong. That means that you're good enough for whatever fate cooks up and sends your way. And you were going to stay that way because you were going to eat meat and move weight. Chuck a deuce.